To be completely honest with you, I've always been okay with ecchi anime and fan service as a concept. I've always seen it as harmless, and I truly believe that to be the case. Even when it's the focus or the selling point of a video game, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. That said, I know some people don't feel the same way, and I do respect that, so let me tell you up front, this game focuses heavily on fan service and those kind of aspects, so you have been warned. To sum up how I personally feel about the game overall though, I think it's actually far better than you'd likely assume, but it is definitely for the more casual JRPG fans. Seven Pirates H is a turn-based JRPG with copious amounts of fan service and a focus on ecchi content. It's actually the fourth game in the Genkai Toki series, with the previous game being Moero Crystal H, another game that I do own but haven't yet talked about on the channel. In the West, we don't actually have the Genkai Toki part of the title, so if you didn't realize that Seven Pirates was actually part of a series, you're probably not the only one. You play as Parute, a pirate girl who sails into the Monsupi Sea. It's a place where treasure is rumored to be hidden, although no humans actually live there. However, a lot of standard monsters and monster girls call this place home. After having a look around, Parute decides that now she's here, she may as well hunt for the lost treasure. This starts off the adventure and sets up the basic plot. The game, to put things simplistically, can be broken down into 4 individual segments. You've got the overworld, the dungeon exploration, the battle screen, and then the menus. What you're seeing here is the overworld. While on this screen, you control a small ship that you can sail around in, allowing you to reach the various quest locations and dungeons. There is no random battles that occur while on the water, but there are some side events and hidden items for you to discover. The initial exploration zone starts off very small with only a few islands, but as you find more maps, the areas will expand and reveal more places to visit. I should also mention that you do need to be on this overworld screen in order to do a lot of things like turn in quests, change equipment, or craft, as you aren't able to do these things while in a dungeon. Next up, we have the dungeons themselves. If you're familiar with JRPGs in general, then you'll probably know what to expect here. After sailing to a certain location and selecting the dungeon, you'll be placed at the start of that dungeon. When inside, you'll be on foot, as you can see here. You'll be able to acquire various items glistening on the ground and also inside of chests, as well as from enemies roaming around the area. The dungeons are generally quite straightforward and relatively small, but they do have a few hidden paths here and there, which usually lead to a chest. Later on in the game, you'll actually unlock the ability to move across water and up the side of cliffs with the help of Oton, the obligatory anime mascot. If at any time you run into an enemy or they run into you, a battle will start and you'll be taken to the battle screen. It's also worth noting that if you walk into the back of an enemy, you'll start that battle with the advantage, but keep in mind that the enemy will have that same advantage if they do the same thing to you. The battle screen will again be easily understandable for anyone who's played a JRPG before. You've got the turn order at the bottom, which also shows the character's HP, MP, and any status effects, plus you've got the command wheel at the center left. On each character's turn, the command wheel allows you to execute one of 5 different commands. If you just press the A button, the character will perform the action in the middle of the wheel, which is a standard attack. To access the other commands, you simply use the D-pad. Pressing up on the D-pad will give you a list of your available items, for example. Pressing right to select skills will allow you to use any of the skills that character has unlocked at the cost of MP. MP is the pink bar under your green health bar, and it actually regenerates as you perform other actions such as the standard attack. There's even some flashy special moves that you can use when a character enters a certain state during combat. You'll also notice that each of the characters and the enemies on the turn order at the bottom of the screen have a colored frame around them. Characters and enemies are either pink, green, or blue. These are called pheromone types and function as a relatively simple weakness system. Lastly, if you just want to get through the fight while grinding for some XP, you can hit the auto battle button at the top left of the screen. Now we come to the menus, and this is where you'll be doing all of your character management, plus pretty much everything else that isn't combat or exploration. Besides the obvious things that don't really need much of an explanation, like buying and selling items or checking your character's stats, there are a few areas of interest. Dotted around the game world in various places, you'll find these small and strange creatures which are actually called boobykin. Functionally, they're a little bit like the Kodama that you would find in the Neo games, but you don't actually see a 3D model of them in the game world. You generally find them on the overworld map while sailing around or inside chests. No, not those chests, these chests. There are 3 different types, which are pirates, merchants, and scholars. Collecting these variants unlocks new features. The more merchant kin that you find, the more items that appear in the shop, for example. These creatures have their own subsection in the menus, and it is a pretty important one. This is where you find helpful info, a crafting menu, and the requests list. And now this is the section that you've all been waiting for. When you defeat enemies in the game, the characters don't actually gain XP in the traditional sense. In fact, they don't even have a level. Instead, they gain something called H-extract, and when they gain enough, it's automatically converted into a substance called training extract. Now, training extract is essentially like a bottled up level that you need to use during the booby training minigame in order to permanently increase a character's stats. In reality, if you have 2 training extract for a certain character in your inventory, you're kinda leaving 2 levels on the table, so to speak, so the idea is to use them as soon as possible. As for the actual booby training minigame, as you might imagine, it is a very spicy affair. This entire game is very unlikely to ever be released on a modern PlayStation console, despite originally being a PS Vita exclusive, but I digress. When you use a training extract, you're given the ability to make 10 moves involving the girls' chests. You can pull, pinch, squash, squeeze, and do all sorts of things in a variety of different ways, and depending on what you choose to do, the character's stats will change. You can increase the size of them to ridiculous levels, which will raise that character's attack stat, but lower their speed stat. Choosing to decrease the chest size will actually have the opposite effect, allowing you to get more speed by sacrificing attack power. Believe it or not, there is quite a bit of nuance to the system with many possible outcomes and combinations, but thankfully, the game does explain it to you during the tutorial. Last but not least, we have the egg system. A lot of the monsters in the game will drop different types of eggs when you defeat them in battle. These eggs can be cracked open by using the bazongas of your choice and have a chance to drop items. It's possible to find rare, ultra rare, and mega rare items, but sometimes it's just a raw egg. So what did I think of the game? Well, as I said at the start, it feels like a very casual JRPG experience. The game was relatively easy throughout, and it can be made easier still by going into the extras menu and turning on a ton of special options. I actually play with all of these options turned off, but to be honest, most players won't even need them. So with that in mind, I guess my first point is that the game doesn't provide much of a challenge. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on you, of course, but for me, I was happy with it. I'm playing a few other much more involved JRPGs in my spare time at the moment, so this was a pleasant stopgap. Everything in this game and about this game is just very straightforward and easy to understand. I was able to just start playing and get into it right away. And when I say that the game's easy, I do mean it, but it's not like you can just sit there and press the attack button over and over to win. Well, actually, you can kinda do that when just randomly grinding, but when it comes to stronger enemies or bosses, you do need to make sure you heal, pay attention to weakness, use buffs, and apply status effects to win. You won't exactly have a tough time of it, but you can't just autopilot the stronger enemies either. In terms of the visuals, I think they're okay. I mean, it is a PS Vita game from 2016 that's been ported to the Switch, so you get what you get really. I do think the 2D artwork is pretty great, the character designs are cool, they're nicely stylized, and they look really good in the menus, but the 3D models aren't quite as good as I'd like. They do the job though, and they look fine enough for this type of game. One thing I will mention here is that some of the girls are designed to have a smaller chest from the start, while some others are rather large. So when you use the training mode to increase the size on the smaller ones, the 3D model can end up looking a little bit odd. I didn't actually record this because it was from much later in the game, but my main character ended up looking like she was packing 2 mortar shells. It doesn't look great, but it is rather funny to see. The environments are a little bit bland to look at, but the overall atmosphere and theme of each area is decent. Dungeon locations like caves, cliffsides, deserts, and an old haunted shipwreck work well enough, and you do move between them at a decent pace, so each of these zones doesn't really wear out their welcome. The gameplay is absolutely fine as a lower-end turn-based JRPG, and I thought it was pretty good. Not exactly worthy of a parade being thrown in its honor, but, you know, good. The flow of combat was quick, the skills and attacks are well animated, especially the super attacks, and the underlying systems and mechanics seem solid to me. I think it's just got good bones, as they say. Getting into and out of battles is very quick as well, allowing you to instantly skip the intro section and the victory pose at the end if you want to. You can also fast forward all of the story dialogue by holding down L1. I will admit the story in the game really didn't matter to me at all. I found it really quite dull, despite the very expressive voice work and artwork on display. The game features Japanese voices only, which is fine, but as good as they are, I just did not care about the story. Towards the end, I just read enough to get the gist of what was going on, and then I skipped the rest in order to get to the gameplay. And finally, when it comes to the fan service stuff, man, this must be one of the highest level fan service games that I've ever played, and I've played a lot of them. This is more in your face than Senran Kagura, more than Neptunia, and more than the Omega Labyrinth games. Personally, I love it. I mean, the game literally has customizable fun bags, need I say more. The training minigame can actually be played with the Switch's touchscreen or a Pro Controller, which is great, but if I was going to give you one negative point, I would say that it was difficult to remember which action produced which result. I found that the system or the process of leveling up was a tiny bit unclear overall, but the difficulty level isn't that high, so not being able to 100% clearly know which stats I was increasing didn't really end up mattering that much. The game does give you all of this info once during the tutorial, but after that I couldn't find it again in-game. It could be that I just missed where it was in the menus, of course, but I thought it was worth mentioning. In my opinion, 7 Pirates H is a solid, ecchi-fueled JRPG that turned out to be a much better game than I expected it to be. It's not what I would call incredible or revolutionary, but it does a lot of things right, and it does those things well. This is a game that knows what it is, and it knows who its fans are. It absolutely plays to those strengths, but it's also got a good game behind it backing it up. Ultimately, you're either into this kind of thing or you're not. If you love fan service, then you'll be very happy because it's got it by the bucket load. If you're indifferent to it or you just accept it being there, I think this would be a safe bet and I'd feel confident recommending it to you. I mean, sure, it's light-hearted, casual, simplistic, and full of jugs, but honestly, when it comes down to it, I think it's a rather good JRPG when all is said and done. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.